Welcome to our April 2015 Hangout for pfSense. My name is Jim Pingle and I'll be your host this month. This month we're going to be talking about Captive Portal. I'm just going to start out with some basic stuff here. I do have eventually planned to do an advanced level Captive Portal in another month or two. A few notes about a project before we start further. Our pfSense 2.2.2 release is out. It's primarily security and bug fixes. It's announced in the usual places on the blog, and the doc wiki have all the details. There was initially a console issue with some of the 2.2.2 updates. We've since fixed that. We should be following up with a 2.2.3 release in the not too distant future, although at the moment we're still trying to focus on some exciting 2.3 stuff we're doing. The new SG series hardware is shipping now. During our last hangout, it was just about ready to, and it hadn't shipped yet. But we've got some really good stuff. Just check it out at store.pfsense.org. Our support, we changed from hourly to a per incident model. If you haven't renewed in a while, you may not realize that. I mean, obviously the people who had support, they're going to, support doesn't change for how you have it now. But when you go to renew, you might move to the new model. And we're still investigating new Hangout hosting options. We're still on Fuse this month, and we'd like to not be, but we still haven't found anything that is viable to host a screen sharing session like this from a Linux box. If you know of something, feel free to chime in and tell us afterwards. But looked at all sorts of different options, like a Big Blue Button and Yugma, I think it was, and Makogo, and a few other things like that. And all of them would host fine from Windows, but not from Linux. And were a couple that would host from Linux, but they had severe limitations on how they worked. So we're still looking for something good there. All right. So in this hangout, kind of gonna have to bounce around a little bit. Unfortunately, a lot of areas of Captive Portal sort of intermingle, and to understand one, you have to get another one. So we're hoping to get you a good basic grounding in it, with plenty of time for questions at the end. So be thinking about questions if you have any. I'm not going to be able to touch on all the areas. Like I said, I'm planning on doing an advanced level one as a hangout here in the next couple of months, to hit some of the more advanced things. But first I'm going to go over, basic description of what Captive Portal is, what it can do, what it can't do, how the zones work, different types of authentication, including vouchers and how those work. A quick run through of the most common portal settings that most people end up using, how to pass things through without a login if you have to, redirecting users, how to make a custom login page, how to check the status and explain the graphs and how that all works, and some basic troubleshooting for the most common things that people run into when they're running a portal. All right, so first up, what is Captive Portal? It forces users to authenticate before they can reach the internet. So somebody turns on their computer, brings up a browser, and the first thing it does is redirect them to your login page. It captures that HTTP request, and it directs it to a portal page. It works great for HTTP, not so much for HTTPS, because it ends up, if you try to redirect HTTPS, the user will get a browser certificate error, which is ugly and not nice. So I mean, you can try to redirect HTTPS, but odds are it's going to be a very confusing experience for the user. But if they just bring up an HTTP page, they'll go right to the portal and then they can log in. That's extremely useful for presenting like a terms of service type page, a user agreement, business or property page, or even just for making sure that only people can get out that actually have a valid login. So you can keep your wireless open, or a wired network sort of open access at the physical level, or a little bit higher, but they can't actually get out unless they have agreed to the terms or paid for an account or whatever. Most common uses are, and you probably have encountered Captive Portal before, even if you haven't used it in pfSense. If you've been, like a hotel, an airport, restaurant, coffee shop, places like that, where you turn on the Wi-Fi and bam, it sends you to a login page, or something like that. You even see it on airplanes these days, where they sell you access. Some businesses also use them for like a BYOD network, or something where it's not not their primary network, but maybe like a secondary network where they allow internet access in a looser manner. Some people use it on their primary business network. It really, it's very flexible, but it's not a right fit for everybody in every situation. But if you have a situation that it fits with, it works really nice. How it works at layer 2. It can work at just layer 3, but primarily it works at layer 2. It checks the MAC address and or the IP address depending on your settings. There's a setting where you can force it to just check the IP address. I'll get to that in a bit. Certain hosts, like your source or destination, can be set to bypass. You want that for like upstream DNS servers, always on devices like servers or printers maybe. You can use that to set up a walled garden where there's only certain sites that they can reach without a login. You could also do that for local servers like on a DMZ, which I'll show you here in a bit. You can also set up automatic per user bandwidth limits if you want. So you could, everybody would get the same limit, but you can set a limit per user there, sort of like you can do with limiters, but it bases it off the user instead of just a blanket thing. And some operating systems and clients, they have support for captive portals built in. I think Windows 8.1 does, and I know like iOS and Android and a few others do it various times, where it'll detect that there's a portal there and pop it up and let you log in. iOS devices seem to have a little bit more trouble than others because it tries to load a page actually on an Apple, and I'm not sure if it just doesn't handle the redirect nice or what, but we've had some issues with iOS devices not detecting. But open up a browser, surf to an HTTP page, and bam, off it goes. It works every time, assuming your other settings are right. A few things you can't do with Captive Portal. It cannot act as a reverse portal for clients on WAN. I know a lot of people see it and they think, oh, well, I can set this up I can force people to authenticate on the WAN and let them in, sort of like a VPN, and no, it doesn't work for that. There might be like a reverse proxy or some other package that you might be able to use for something like that, but really what you need there is an actual VPN, not a Captive Portal. It does not at the moment work through IPv6. It's just pure IPv4 only. And it's only effective if clients have a unique MAC and IP address combo. So if you have a box on your network somewhere like a wireless router, not an access point, that's actually doing NAT or some sort of masking of the traffic, then it's not going to work for that because first person is going to log in, and all the others are going to have that, as far as pfSense sees, the same IP address and MAC address, and they're just going to pass right on through. So you really need to make sure that pfSense sees them directly at layer 2, or if you disable MAC filtering, pfSense at least needs to see a unique IP address, if not MAC address. Also, this is just for authentication, so not encryption. So especially with wireless, that can be a concern, because if you don't have WPA2 or something on, then if your wireless is completely open, people will you'll still be able to sniff that traffic. It's not really going to protect the users. So you need to be concerned about that. Not as huge a concern on a wired network, but it's still a concern. It also doesn't isolate them from things inside that same subnet. That would be more of a task for a switch. But it will handle the authentication portion, no problem. You just need to be aware that it's not something for encryption. So it's for access control, but not necessarily security in that way. As I mentioned a moment ago, you can't effectively redirect HTTPS because no portal really can, unless the user's browser has a trusted CA configured that is using the same CA as the firewall, basically. And even then, you might end up getting some other problems. It's pretty ugly trying to grab HTTPS. It just goes against the whole idea of the protocol. So beware of that. If you have bridged interfaces, like say you've bridged your LAN to your wireless, it can work, but you have to make sure that you have assigned the bridge interface, like bridge 0, and make sure that you have the IP address and all the other settings, including the portal, bound to the bridge 0 interface, however you have it assigned, not to the member interfaces. If you've got a proxy around like Squid, it's going to take some extra work to function. That's not something I'm going to cover today, but there are some things some people on the forum who've got that documented and what does and doesn't work. There's some ugly handling for that in Squid 3 that actually modifies the captive portal code, which is really ugly, and I don't recommend doing that if you can avoid it at all. It's just not good. Also, another common misconception, you can't do per user rules based on the login name. So yeah, they can log into the portal, firewall knows the portal's username, but there's no way to translate that into associating a given set of firewall rules with that portal user. It'd be nice if it would, but at the moment it's not a feature we've got. And lastly, there's no LDAP authentication support. It can do local or radius or vouchers or even no authentication, but no, can't do LDAP. All right, first up, we're going to talk a little bit about zones. They allow for multiple independent portals. So you can have multiple zones, and each zone has completely independent settings. You have to have at least one zone, and you just, when you make a zone, when you start Captive Portal, they won't have any zones, so it first will prompt you to create a zone. So you have to give it a zone name, which has to be pretty simple, like no special characters. You can only have letters, digits, and underscores, sort of the same idea as maybe an alias name type restriction. And then a brief description. And these fields here, at the moment, there's no way to edit these after you put them in, so be really careful when you go to create this zone that you have the right settings in there. So each zone can operate on one or more interfaces. So like here, I've got this zone configured on the LAN, but I could have it on both LAN and DMZ. That said, if you have two separate zones, they can't operate on the same interface. So you couldn't have two zones both on LAN. That would be, it just doesn't work. There's no way to define that behavior. All right, I think I got all that. So if we go into this zone here, you see after you create a zone, you get all your normal portal options here, and you're ready to go. So that was quite a handy thing that came along. I think it was not too long ago. And it's really nice to be able to have the multiple portals and also to spread that portal across multiple interfaces is really good. I'll talk a little bit about authentication types. It really depends on the type of portal you're creating. The entire purpose may hinge on the authentication type you've chosen or vice versa. One of the most common things people do is just have a click-through. You can set it to no authentication. Basically, you just make a form with a button to push to submit to the post value back to the portal daemon, and you can just put whatever you want in there. Terms of service, splash page, welcome to my restaurant, welcome to my coffee shop, whatever. And just a simple click through that says I agree or go online or something, and then that gets submitted back in, and then they can move on through. For local users, if you set that, it's usually the best for a small number of users because you have to manage the users inside pfSense if you choose that. And there's a captive portal permission that's optional. I'll show you here. If you only allow users and groups with captive portal set, I don't have that required on this portal, but if I go over here to my users, you can see they're all members of this group here. And if I look in this group has the captive portal login permission. So you can do it that way if you've got local users, or you can just not require that permission at all, and then every local user can get through on the portal. Now, vouchers are really great for, like it says here, for time-limited, anonymous but secure access, like hotels and restaurants, places where making a user for everybody is just not viable. You wouldn't want to make a fresh user for everybody that came through a hotel, and likewise, you probably don't want to have everybody in the hotel sharing the same username. Some places it's really common to do that, where they'll have like a room number or just a login for the entire hotel. And if you're doing that, you may as well not even have authentication at all. But vouchers are a good compromise because you can generate these secure randomized codes, and everybody you can just hand those out like candy to your customers. And and then they get in for a little bit of time and they're locked out afterwards. So it's really good compromise there. Lastly, you can do radius authentication. authentication, which is really good for large numbers of users, or if you've got if you want to use some of the extended attributes that we've got, you can actually put in radius per user bandwidth limits or time limits. You can have users in a group and have it return certain reply attributes back for that. We're not going to get into radius this month with this. It's just very complicated. I could spend probably a whole entire hangout just talking about captive portal radius stuff. But it's good for tying back into an existing authentication structure like Active Directory or like Free Radius, something like that if you've already got one. A little bit more about vouchers. They are access codes that are based off of cryptographic keys. And if we go here into our portal, I'll go back over here to the Vouchers tab. Well, first, let me back up a second and go back over here to the captive portal. You can see here in the authentication settings, the authentication setting is shared between local user manager and vouchers, so both of those can be valid at the same time. You have to enable the vouchers separately if you want, but if you just want vouchers, you can set it this way, allow that, check the box to only allow those captive portal users here, and then if you don't have any users with that privilege, then no other users can get in. You could also, in your custom login page, strip out everything but the voucher field and run that way too. All of these vouchers are created from the keys that are generated here. When you first enable vouchers, these settings actually randomize every time you refresh the page, and then once you enable vouchers and save, it locks them in. So these are, you don't ever want to give these up, because if somebody were to actually able to access these public and private keys, they could generate their own vouchers and work around your security, which you don't want. Each roll of vouchers, which is the unit you make them in, when you make these vouchers, you have to put in a roll number, which needs to be unique. How many minutes the vouchers are active. So like 60 minutes is an hour. You could have some people do 45 minutes, some do like 480 minutes for several hours. So you have lots of flexibility there in terms of time. You have to specify how many vouchers to put on the roll. It's anywhere between 1 and 1023. Depending on how much churn you have in your location, those 1023 vouchers could last you a month, they could last you a week, they could last you a day. It all depends on how many people you have to turn over. You can make as many rolls as you want, so it may, for a very, very large environment that may seem low, but you can always make multiple batches of rolls and do whatever you need there. And once somebody uses a voucher, or you manually expire the voucher, it can't be reused. So it's good that you can hand somebody that voucher ticket and be confident that they can get in this one time, but they can't ever get in again. Now, and then after you make those vouchers, there's a little symbol here which will export the vouchers as a CSV file, which you can open up in like LibreOffice Calc or Excel or Google Docs, whatever you want to do that with. We have people that either will print them from there, like on a label printer, or they'll print sheets of stickers or whatever, put them on receipts, hotel keys, whatnot. That data could also be imported into the right point of sale system, and you could, maybe print it directly on a receipt, or you buy a coffee, you get a 30-minute voucher code, something like that. But you can use them however you want. I know some people will just print them up, toss them in a bowl behind the counter, and have their employees hand them out. Some people, like I said, put stickers on them, like a hotel. You could slap a sticker on the key envelope or whatever as you hand it out. Or you could use them privately, and every time your kid does a chore, they could get a 10-minute voucher for internet access. All right, so let's go through some of these other captive portal options over here. All right, first and most obvious is this checkbox to enable captive portal. Then you select your interfaces. You can control click to do multiple interfaces, or click, shift click or whatever. It's just a usual multi-select box. These maximum current concurrent connections, this is not how many portal clients you have total or even how many per user can be on. This is just the number of people who can hit the portal process at a time, the actual login page daemon, the light HTTPD daemon here on the firewall. If you need to dial that up or down, you can. What that really affects is how many web server threads and PHP processes are going to end up running to handle portal logins. So if you have a ton of clients who all need to log in at the same time, you might have to raise that up. If you have people that log in sporadically throughout the day or over time, it may not be a big concern. So that's something a lot of people don't really have to tweak that, but it's very commonly misinterpreted as to what it is. Okay. The idle timeout is sort of like what it says. If the user sends no data whatsoever in that time, then their connection will be cut off. And they can log in and they can go back and log in again if their credentials allow them. But it's really, some people use that to make sure that people get kicked off so they're not taking up resources. Some people just, if they're idle, they want to send them back to a splash page after a while, because it could just be that they left their computer on and walked away, or that they, signed off, or whatever. The hard timeout's a little bit more harsh. That says that, like I've got here, every 60 minutes, that guy is going to get cut off, period. So 60 minutes pass after login, and they will immediately go back to the login page. And as with the idle timeout, if their credentials are still valid, they can get right back in, but they have to do that. In some places, especially like a restaurant or coffee shop type place, that tends to get set pretty low. Like in a hotel, you might set that to around a day. To where you want to force them to log back in every day, so they can't sit on indefinitely. Even if their voucher was valid for a week, you'd still might want them to log back in every day. That's a pretty common requirement in things like that. And so one of the things to look out for with the hard timeout too, if you do set a pretty long hard timeout, you need to make sure that hard timeout is shorter than your DHCP lease time. Otherwise, you could end up with somebody's IP changing before their hard timeout is hit, and so the Captive Portal session tracking gets a little weird in that regard. So you don't want somebody's IP to change to a different MAC, and then their session is still valid. That's pretty crazy. So if you have a hard timeout, make sure it's set to less than your DHCP lease time. Okay, we're not going to go through the pass-through credits. They can get pretty complicated, and pass-through MAC and everything. So we'll do that in the advanced one. All right, logout pop-up. Its usefulness is really debatable these days, because odds are people have got pop-up blockers in their browser, and it's not really going to help much. But when it does work, it's handy to have, so users actually have a way to log themselves out if they want, rather than just dropping their session. All right, so flip down here to this next slide. Talk about the redirects a little bit, and then I'll go back since we're hitting them here. This pre-authentication redirect URL, it's not one that we see used a lot, but there are certain requirements certain corporate requirements that have necessitated this. How that field got added was, somebody, one of our clients, was handed down a directive from on high that said you need to do this. Basically, instead of going immediately to the portal when they open up the browser, it takes them to a corporate landing page, and that corporate landing page then links them back to the portal login, and then after the portal login they get sent to yet another different page. And the pre-auth URL, it does require some extra code in the actually in the login page to handle. And that's in the book. I mean, if you're here, you've got gold, you can look that up in the book. It explains how to use it. And you just have to put that extra code at the top of your page, and then you have to have your actual landing site link back to the right portal URL, and then it should all just work from there. It's really nice. If you leave that blank, as most people do, then they'll just go right to the portal login page. The after authentication URL is the most common one of these to see used. Basically, after they log in, it forces them to go to this page. And I can show you a little demo over here in a client VM. This Firefox web browser, this is on Ubuntu. It's going to try to go to the Ubuntu start page. You can see here in the URL, it's trying to go to start.ubuntu.com. And I've got my custom login page with a really ugly logo that I did in like 2 seconds in paint.net and some custom text. But if I log in here, instead of going to start.ubuntu.com, it's coming over here to pfSense.org, which is where our post-auth redirect told it to go. If you leave that blank, then they will go to whatever they tried to load in the first place. So if they're, they'll end up back at their home page. Most commonly, you'll see this ending up on a site-specific restaurant or hotel property type thing, where, like welcome to the Austin whatever hotel. So it'll be specific to a city or a location or something like that, or even just a corporation. You could maybe have an internal portal or some other page you want to send them to, which is handy. Another common use you might see too, if you have it set to no authentication and you have this redirect, and it's an easy way to force users just to go to your desired start page, without requiring them to enter a code, which is also, we've seen it be a requirement of like a hotel chain type thing. All right, this last one here, the blocked MAC address URL redirect. I'll get to how to block MACs here in a minute, but if you can send them to like a page that says, you've been hacked, or please read our terms of service. This is basically a see me type thing where they, if they're blocked, they'll land on that page and then hopefully take some other action. They're not going to get anywhere else. They do need to have access to that server, so it's going to have to be something that's bypassed through the portal or on the LAN. Same thing here with the pre-auth redirect URL. You need to make sure that wherever they're going, the pre-auth server has to be passed through the portal specially, and I'll get to how to pass things through here in just a moment. But you need to make sure that not just that server, but any assets it pulls in from the outside would also have to be allowed through as well, which can get kind of tricky at times. So just be on the lookout for that. If it's a web server you control, it's probably pretty easy. Just an IP or two you need to add through, and off it goes. All right, back up through here. Concurrent user logins, that will stop a single person from logging in multiple times. So if you have one user and they try to log in 2 times, their first session will become invalid when the second session starts. So that's usually desirable if you've got a limited amount of users. You wouldn't want that if you're doing the concept like where everybody or groups of people are sharing a user, which we don't like, but some people still insist on it. Let's see. Okay. Next up here is MAC filtering. I touched on that a little bit ago. It's best when you're routing, like say you've got a layer 3 switch and all your clients are behind that layer 3 switch. That layer 3 switch is their gateway. Then all that traffic gets handed up to pfSense. So pfSense doesn't see the MAC address of everybody, but it sees a unique IP address, which is good enough. And if you've got a setup like that, just turn on disable MAC filtering, and it'll work just fine. Look down here at the per user bandwidth. If you want to take advantage of this, all you have to do is check the box and put in what you want the download and upload speeds to be. It is in kilobits per second, so keep the units in mind. Then as they log in, they'll be assigned a limiter automatically based on what you enter there. Already went over the authentication options a little bit, but I'll go through again. You've got your no authentication, which would just be a click through. You have local user managers and vouchers, which is tied together with your Captive Portal login privilege if you want. Then you have radius authentication, and that's the big one. I mean, you have all of these options here are for various types of radius authentication, multiple radius servers. You can have primary and secondary radius sources, and those sources can have different servers. So like if they fail this one, it'll fall over to this one. We've seen people do that with like two-factor auth, or like one had card pin service as the first one, and then it fell back to like an employee login on the second one. You can also do radius accounting. and all sorts of other tweaks to how things get sent to and from the Radius server that we've collected over the years. Down here is HTTPS login for the portal. If we notice here, let me go back to, let me just kick this Captive Portal user off here, which is, if I go back to my client, if it was a blink and you miss it type thing. But if I come back here, load this up, it actually, I had HTTPS login on, and I had the certificate trusted by the browser already. But if you have a valid host name here that has a certificate for it that's actually trusted by the user's browser, it could even just be a commodity certificate that you've purchased, like from Komodo or whoever, and you load it up on the firewall, and you choose, you pick HTTPS login, you enable that, you enter in the host name that should be presented to the clients, and then you choose the SSL certificate here. And when you have that in there, then when the user will get redirected to the HTTPS version of the login page. And there they go. And you might have noticed too, a little bit of an aside, I didn't mention it earlier, every portal in each zone runs on its own port number here. Like this internal zone, I forget what zone ID it ends up being, but it probably zone ID 3, since it's port 8003. So if you're making links and things, especially with a pre-auth URL, you need to make sure you get it linked back to the right port number. And if you're not sure what that is, you can always, if you have a custom page, if you view current page, it shows you the URL and port number to the portal down below. Disable HTTPS forwards. It's sort of like what I said. You really probably do want to check that, just because it can get kind of ugly with the way people get, they would get presented with a certificate error that might be confusing to them. Like, hey, I tried to load Google, I got a certificate error. What are you doing? That kind of thing. So probably best to keep that checked, but it's really a matter of preference. If you're okay with that, you can go on that way as well. And lastly, here we've got the custom portal pages. Most people set the portal page and the authentication error page the same, just because you can have a little field in that page that will display the error message. I'll show you back here in just a moment. The most basic portal page it's showing you is right here. It's got just the form. It's got inputs for the username and the password and the voucher code. It has the hidden parameter for the redirection URL, and it's got the submission button. And we do have some samples that people have posted on the forum. It links here for you to search around for Captive Portal samples. You'll find it too. That sample code here can help you start forming one, or if you look in the source code, you can get the default page. And I've got the source for this that I'm going to post with the Hangout notes as well. Basically, this is the default page for Captive Portal, but I just made a few edits to it. Like I added my logo, I changed some text around and things here. You can see here this little status box. If the login failed, this portal message macro would show. And speaking of macros, to get this code, what you absolutely do not want to do is load the portal page, view source, and save that, because these macros will have been interpreted after that, and you really don't want to present that to the user in that way. You really need to have these macros here, especially like your portal action, portal reader URL, portal zones, or portal zone, your portal message, that stuff. You really need to make sure those macros remain intact like they are with the $signs like that. So the best thing to do is to use the little sample that's on the page, view this, or go into the source code, the pfSense source code repository, not the view source of the page, and grab the code from there, or just take this page as a starting. Take the page we'll have up with the Captive Portal notes for this month with your as an example, and just hack on it from there. Once you upload it, at least on version 2.2, there are links here to download the current page, which you could use, or to restore the default portal page, which would erase your custom changes. Viewing the current page just opens a browser to the portal URL, which, depending on where your client is located, may or may not work. So like this page here, just to show you again, it's got the form post action, it's got the hidden inputs for the redirection URL in the zone. It has a custom image, and I'll show you how to use the file manager here in just a moment. Just some styling and just the header text here, and then down in here inside the table, just like in the example, it's got our auth user field, our auth pass field, and auth voucher field, and our submission button. So it's a little bit fancier, but all the basics are the same. Now, to get that custom image on this login page, like if we flip back over here and look at my ugly logo, to get that image there, first I had to upload over here using the File Manager tab. And as you can see, it's my example co ugly logo PNG, and when I uploaded it, it prefixed it with this captive portal dash, which is a special signaling for the web server to know that it needs to serve that file directly. So when you reference these in the source of the pages, you need to have that accounted for. So when I reference this image here, it's captive portal dash example co ugly logo.png, even though my original file was just example co ugly logo png. So once it's on the file manager, it's available for use here, and you can upload CSS files, images, whatever you want to do. Some people have put even like videos or a PDF, a terms of service type thing up there as well. Just so long as you realize that when you form your links or references in the HTML, it's got to include the captive portal dash before it. And then once you've got that set, once you've got that page created, all you do is just come down here, choose File, find it on your file system, and browse to it, select it, and then hit save, and boom, off you go. All right, talk a little bit about passing devices through. These are for like your always-on devices, things of that nature, or blocking as well. These are the next three tabs across the top. First, we've got our MAC tab, and this lets you either pass or block somebody based on MAC address, which is good if you're on the same layer 2 as the user. You can pass here and put in the MAC address and a description and give it bandwidth, or if you choose block, you just need to enter the MAC address, and that will just prevent them from getting online at all if they're blocked. And if you have the blocked address URL redirect filled in, and if it sees an HTTP request, it'll try and send them over to your blocked server. Now, allowed IP addresses work similarly, but it's based off of IP addresses instead of MAC addresses. This is good for remote DNS servers, local servers that need to get out and people need to get into. In particular, like say you've just got one interface locally, like your LAN, and you've got a server on your LAN, and you need to open up a port forward to that on the LAN. Now, Captive Portal is going to block that unless you have it pass through. If you notice it works sometimes but not others, maybe it's only working when somebody on that system has actually signed on through Captive Portal, and so it needs to get through. Similarly, if you have Captive Portal and you need to get to like a VPN network or something else that they're supposed to be able to get through to, or another local interface, you'll need to add that in here as an allowed IP address, or you can use it for a net block as well, or a subnet. So anything that they can reach without logging in should be listed here. The most common thing we see left out that needs to be there is if you don't have local DNS, you're forcing them to use like 8888 for DNS. You have to pass that through, and then once you do, they can get their DNS and then get to the portal page. So as you can see here, I've got a local web server, and we can come back over here, and you see I'm not signed into the portal, but if I just go to my over here, bam, I can reach my test site because This is on a server in my DMZ interface, and I have passed it through right here using an allowed IP address entry. So as you can see, really easy, but it's also really easy to overlook. So you really need to pay attention to that one. Allowed host names works just like allowed IP addresses, except it works based off of DNS. It's good for things that have a static set of IP addresses that you want to send through. It does not work for lots of large websites that return round-robin data sets of DNS data. It really needs a static set, or it can be DYNE DNS, but it can't change on every query, because say you just have your own host name for your own server. It just resolves to, like, say, one or even 5 IP addresses. That'll work fine. But you take something like Google, where, say, the firewall does a DNS query, it gets back one set of addresses, so it passes those through. User does a DNS query, it gets back a completely different set of addresses, and then it won't get let through. And so it just ends up confusing, because, well, I'm passing through Google, why is it not working? Well, because it doesn't work for that type of address. Like the allowed IP addresses, it's just got the place to enter, your value, which is your host name in this case. A description, you could do a bandwidth limit if you want. And difference with host name here is you have a choice of directionality. You can pass to and from, or just from, or just to. So if you had something that was on your LAN, you wanted to allow it out, but you wanted to use the host name, you'd use from, vice versa for to. Alright, well, let me log this guy back into the portal so I can show you the status a little bit better. I'll use one of these other accounts. Alright, so now that they're there, if we go to the logs, which you can get to either from the log link here in the shortcut bar, or if you go to status and system logs on the portal auth tab, both land you in the same place. You can see this is where all the portal login and logout and disconnect type events will show up. So you can see here I had login, disconnect, login, so it goes on down the line like that. So this is a bit like the raw data for logins. If you really want to or don't want to use it, it's really up to you. If we go to status at Captive Portal, you can see it shows the user's IP address, it shows the MAC address if you know it. If you have MAC filtering off, this field is blank. It's got the username who logged in and when their session started. Same thing over here with the widget. It shows, it doesn't show the session time here, but it shows the IP address, MAC address, and username. You can go back to the widget from here. If you look over here too, you can get it active. If a voucher is active, it will show up in this list. And this voucher role status shows you the usage of your current roles. Like I had that one role made and I tried one, so it shows 1 is used, 0 active, 1,022 are ready to be used, and number of tickets is 1,023. Got test vouchers here. That will let you input a voucher code to try it out. So let's just go back over here to my zone, go back to vouchers, pull up this list. Open this up in LibreOffice. And you can see I've got a bunch of voucher codes here. And let me just copy this code. As you can see, these vouchers are randomized. They by default include a mix of upper and lowercase and numbers. You can reduce that character set, but it'll make the vouchers longer because it needs to get more bits of entropy there. So say I go back to my status page, and this test vouchers, and I paste in this voucher code. Make sure I don't have any extra spaces around it. If I hit submit, it'll say, okay, voucher was good. It said it was good for 60 minutes. and then say I don't want anybody to use that voucher. I can paste that in here to expire and submit. So if you have somebody that says, oh hey, you gave me this voucher code, it doesn't work, what's up? And then you can take that voucher code, try to test it and see what happens. So off it goes. Next thing here for status is the graphs. It's under status and RRD graphs. Here on the captive portal tab, there are two graphs. First, we have a logged in graph, which is it's a total count, which I think it's just for the day. So like I've only got one user, but you can see here they were logged in for a bit and then I logged them out and logged in again, so it shows 2 total logins for the day here. And then we have our more useful concurrent graph here, which actually shows you how many people were online at the same time, which is right now just one. See, I had one person logged in, then they were logged out, and then logged in again. So concurrent will show you how many people are on concurrently, how many total users at a time. Logged in just gives you a nice ever increasing count of the people who logged in that day. So okay, a little bit of troubleshooting. Just the most common by far problem that people have is they say, oh well, I opened it up and I didn't get redirected to the login page. Well, the 3 main ways that happens are, number one is DNS servers are not right. They have no DNS resolution. DNS resolution doesn't work, and when that doesn't work, the client doesn't even try to make an HTTP request and thus doesn't get the portal. The most common way that happens, as I mentioned a couple of times, if you have external DNS like Google on 8888.8844 or OpenDNS or something remote that you're pushing directly to the users. It's not a problem if you're using the firewall for DNS, because there's an exception for that if they're using the firewall's interface IP as their DNS server. But for remote DNS servers, you absolutely have to pass them through using an allowed IP address entry, or a similar entry to pass that through. Even if it's on a different local interface, you still have to pass that through. They have to be able to reach that without being logged into the portal. Okay, so and if they have working DNS, which is pretty easy to check, if they just open up a command prompt and type ping and then ping something by name, and if they don't even get a name back, it's something's broken with DNS. Next thing is to look at your firewall rules and to make sure that the firewall rules allow outbound access on port 80. So HTTP, they have to be able to hit that. If they can't get outbound to port 80, then they will never hit the code that redirects them to the portal daemon. Also, if the client has an HTTPS homepage and you can't viably redirect HTTPS, just have them try to load an HTTP page instead of trying to load HTTPS and see how that works. And if all those fail, you can try hitting the portal IP import directly, like I showed you the URL for the portal in this case is the host name of my firewall, colon 8003, but in your case it might be the IP address of the firewall colon something else. The port number changes from zone to zone. It's based on the internal zone ID, so it starts at 8002 and goes up from there. So it could be 8002 or 3 or 4 or 12. It just depends on your settings. And we have an entry in the doc wiki for doing some more advanced troubleshooting, but most of that involves digging at like the IPFW rules and things that are a little bit more complicated, but very rarely do we actually need to inspect at that level. So that's really just about it. It's probably not going to be next month. It might be a month or two down the road, but I do want to have another revisit to this with some more advanced topics, primarily more complicated configurations involving like a radius server, talking about more about bandwidth limits and custom time limits, and maybe even some of the other, maybe a demonstration of the pre-auth URL type thing. And I'd hope to squeeze that in this time, but it was just wasn't good. It wasn't enough time. So at this point, I guess we're open for questions. If people have questions, let me pull this chat out here if it'll let me. There we go. Oh, somebody was asking, in the authentication page be on HTTPS, and yeah, you saw that I did. One voucher per does the fact that vouchers are one-time only usage, does that mean you have one voucher per device? Yes, it's one voucher for everything, really. You would not want to share vouchers. So if somebody's got a bunch of devices, you would have to print out, one voucher per device. It it's not really all that complicated, just to pop in a few different voucher codes, though. It's depends on your existence. Alrighty. So, do we have any more questions, or I can wait a few more minutes here for people to type. Not sure why the audio might have dropped out a little bit ago. I did mute it, but it was only for a moment because I had to cough. But I don't know if it was if it was back then or not. See, different levels of access to different people will be desirable. Is that planned for future release? I don't know. It's something we get asked for fairly often, but I don't know how viable that is, if it's something we can do. If we can do that, it might be possible with Radius. I know our Radius integration with OpenVPN lets us do that, so it might be viable to also do something similar with Captive Portal and Radius, but it's not there now, but it might show up eventually. Let's see, when the hard timeout ends, what happens to users download in progress, stuff like that? Everything gets cut off. It's just like they're logged out of the portal completely. They would have to log back in, and if their browser was smart enough or their download manager smart enough, it could pick back up. But if they were, say, streaming a movie or something like that, it would definitely interrupt them. So yeah, it's more akin to having their states removed entirely than just like turning into a block rule, if you want to sort of equate it with like a scheduled type thing. But no, it's really their entry is just removed from the login. They're timed out, and then they fall back into the default mode where everything they do will hit the portal and die until they log in again. Question. So there we go. For username/login access, is there a way to watch for brute force script testing? I don't remember off the top of my head. They might hit the same lockout that the GUI does, but I'd have to double check that. If they do, then it would, after I think it's 15 attempts and 5 attempts in 15 minutes or 15 an hour, something like that. It's a pretty sane limit. Then their IP gets blocked. But I don't know if they hit that or not on the portal daemon. I'd have to double check on that. I don't think they do, but it might be something we would definitely want to look into in the future. So you'd want separate admin users from Captive Portal users. Definitely, I would always recommend you not share logins like that. If somebody's going to have a portal login, ideally would want it separate from their admin login if they were a firewall admin. There might be some cases where that's desirable to have them have both, but there's no guarantee that somebody who brute forces a Captive Portal login is going to know that they've got any other privileges and rights, but it's probably worth it to have separate login structure for that. But I have to check on the brute forcing thing there. It's I know it does run mod evasive, where if they try to connect too many times, it turns them away. So that might be some component of that already, but I just don't know if it actually would do that based on failed logins. All right, any other questions? So we have two-factor auth integrated into our Radius backend. Will the portal wait long enough for two-factor auth to take place? I'm pretty sure it does. We have people that have used portal logins that actually connect to remote Radius servers that handle um, like credit card PIN type cards, like prepaid card type things, and those have taken their sweet time to respond. So I'm pretty sure that it would be long enough for two-factor auth. I have not tried that personally. And I can't remember anybody off the top of my head who did, but I know we've had people who had to deal with some pretty sluggish Radius servers, so it doesn't surprise me that if it would wait long enough for that. I think it would, but we'd have to try it. Anything else? I'll wait just a few more moments in case somebody's typing. Well, I guess that'll do it for this month. If you have any other ideas for upcoming Hangouts, just drop us a line, either on the blog post, on Reddit, on the forum, or even by email. However you want to get them to us. If you have any suggestions, feel free to pass them on. Again, also, if you know of any screen broadcasting software that works to host from Linux, we'd love to hear about that too, because everything we're running into has just really absurd limits that we don't want to deal with, or it just isn't capable of hosting from Linux. So, love to hear if anybody has any input on that. And as always, thank you for attending, and we'll see you next month.